I'm happy you're here. And by here, I mean alive and well.
That makes two of us.
Yeah. You had us all scared for a while.
Had a close brush with death.
Again.
And
you won again.
But this was my fourth time, but this is the first time I went through it consciously.
Mm.
I had double knee replacement surgery. I was doing fine for 2 days, and then I got a pulmonary embolism. Ended up in ICU for about 12 days, where my condition continued to worsen. I was in the COVID ward of the hospital, by the way. And I was dying little by little. Fascinating experience because I was aware of it this time. And the interesting part about it is I got to the point where I was making funeral arrangements with my oldest sons, where hospital staff came in and asked me if I wanted to talk to a priest.
Oh, wow.
And make my last confession. Because when I went in, they asked me for a religious preference, and I said Catholic off the top of my head, which is, I've been a fallen away Catholic ever since I was discovered girls. Okay.
That's actually exactly what happened with me.
Yeah, it happens to a lot of
when I was about 11 years old.
12, yeah.
I watched a Britney Spears video. That was it.
Yeah. All of a sudden, that's not a sin.
Yeah, right.
And the whole doubt starts going. But anyway, well, let me tell you, take a little break and from that story and say, my first time in Vietnam at age 18, I remember when I was in what might be called processing safe areas. I remember going to confession like 3 times in 3 days. By the end of 25 months later, I was an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
So people say, what happened to your religion? War happened to my religion. But that's another story. So anyway, I'm dying. I know I'm dying. My oxygen levels keeps getting lower and lower. The doctor came in and told me about a story about a guy down the ward who decided to go home, and he died 2 days later. I wasn't afraid, but you go into what's called delusion. It's called later on I found it's called ICU delusions. And what happened to me is I couldn't keep a thought together. My mind started wandering all over the place. And in those delusions, I turned to Greek mythology. I likened my experience to that of Odysseus going into Hades and meeting with the spirit of his fallen comrade in Troy, Achilles. And in the Odyssea, Odysseus sees Achilles, and Achilles is but a mere sad, lonely shadow, dismal, sad, forlorn. And that's the exact same feeling I had. I actually went back to that scene in my own mind, which is where I was. I was going to be that dismal shadow wherever. And it was it was a dismal, sad, and forlorn feeling, but there was no avoiding it. And I was fully conscious, but delusional at the time. I also went to my mind went back to a martial arts book that I had read at around age 16, Martial Arts of the World. And they talked about a famous Muki fighter called Gama from India. Muki is a sand pit fighting art where you tape your hands, but inside your hand is a brass knuckle inside your tape. And that book, I hadn't thought of that since I was years old. But yet in this delusional state I was in while I was in the process of dying, my mind went back to that quite clearly. And in one plate, it showed a picture of Gama, big, thick guy, big, ferocious mustache, all oiled up in kind of a loincloth, East Indian loincloth. And he's holding his fist up like that. Well, he's got his hand over a downed opponent, a guy that's crouching in pain. And he's a fierce looking fighter. And on the other plate, in the book was Gamma at age 68. And I remember the lines had brought down by illness and old age. And it was a skinny old guy. It was just a mere shadow of what he had been as a youth, and that was me again.
Hmm.
That was me again. I was diminished. I was going. I was going to go away. I was going to cease to exist. The other notable delusion that I had was that I was walking down an old street that we used to live in Chicago. I was down walking north on Glenwood. I got to Devon, made a right turn facing west, and down the block was my now deceased mother. And she was there with a bunch of her friends. My mother was a beautiful woman, had a lot of beautiful women friends. And I was kind of their darling when I was 11, 12 years old. I was the guy that used to tweak his cheek. He's so cute, My mother was the only one in that group with a child my age. So they were all like beautiful, loving, sexy aunts, they just to spoil the hell out of me, and it just treat me like their little darling. So she was there with them about half a block down. And all her girlfriends turned to me and said, "Oh, Kenny, come on over. Oh, we're so glad to see you." All those women are deceased. And my mother was standing with them. And I started walking toward them. My mother looked at me very seriously, almost in a harsh tone, said, "No, we're talking women stuff. You go back to where you came from." And I came back and I turned around. That was my near-death experience. I've never done drugs in my life.
Except for alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, tobacco. I've smoked weed about 5 times, and it just made me stupid, So, I never did it, And every time I smoke weed, it was typically with some girl taking off her clothes and saying, "Here, try this so we can have a good time." At a certain point, I said, not for me. I would fall asleep in 3 minutes. So what good was it going to do me? So, yeah. So, but that was like almost like a drug trip that I underwent for a period of about 2 days. And then I got a couple of blood transfusions, and it was like turning a switch back on. All of a sudden I could think rationally, and I began to hope that I wouldn't die. And I didn't. But it was a fascinating experience. And here's the bad part of it. Every other time I've woken up from when, in retrospect, I might have been dead or I should have been dead. It was always, I had no memory of what happened to me.
Mhm.
I would wake up in a hospital and go, "How'd I get here? What happened?" And
Right.
people would tell me, "You were shot, you were beat up, you were thrown off a cliff," whatever,
So if you would have died in those cases, it wouldn't have made a difference because you were kind of gone already.
I had no memory of the process
Right.
of getting to the point of waking up in a hospital. One time was when I was shot in my left shoulder. Another time was, when I got hit in the head with a baseball bat. Another time was when I was blown up, and unconscious. And luckily I had been in a hole, but the concussion, shook me up so much so that I was out. I had a concussion and I was unconscious for a couple of days.
Uh-huh.
But you wake up and you go, "What happened?"
Yeah, it's like when you get knocked out in a fight.
Yeah,
You see
you
it all
don't
the
remember
time.
it. Yeah,
Fighters, they go, "What happened?" They look at the referee. "What happened?"
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Or if you get choked unconscious or something. You see it all the time in MMA.
Correct.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was it was a 48-hour process, and it was just it was just mind blowing because I wonder. I'm 74 now. I know what it's like, and I'm going, "Holy shit!" Am I going to go through this again?
Mm.
When is it going to happen?
Right.
And am I going to be conscious? And am I going to deal with it differently? And am I going to be more understanding of it, more accepting of it, more or less sad of it? Because the overwhelming the overwhelming emotional feeling was a sadness, just a dismal, profound sadness. Not depression,
Mm.
not depression, just a sadness, just like, oh my God, the diminishing of me and my spirit and everything that I have ever been, to a meaningless point. That was a heck of an experience, I'll tell you that much. Um, and did it change me in any way? Not very profoundly, but other than give me an understanding of what I have yet to go through,
Mhm.
and what other human beings who are diminished that way go through. And it's a sad thing, And I think that's why we all fear death, because it's the end of us, but that's mankind's curse. We know we are finite.
Right. Well, in some cases, that's I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, talk about it, and he goes, "The knowledge that my life will not continue on forever is what gives me the fuel to get up every day and make the most out of every single day and try to achieve as much as possible." He goes, "If I knew that I wasn't going to die for 50,000 years, I'd probably be very lazy."
Nah, I haven't had that thought. I still like lazy. Yeah, it's no great motivation for me. I get up and I do what I do. Oh, I have to get this done. Nah.
Are you any different with how you interact with your loved ones now than before you went through that experience? From what I can tell, you're always you're always in close contact with your kids, your wife. You're always letting them know that
Yeah, the answer is no. The answer is no. I've always been very mindful
Mhm.
of how I deal with my kids. I don't judge. I encourage, especially adults.
Yeah.
You can't judge an adult child. You can't tell them you should be doing this. You tell them, hey, good, you're doing great. Think about this, think about that. It's mentoring. It's more of a mentoring, wise old man process. Now talking to my children and my grandchildren.
That's probably very good. That probably allows you to be very happy when you're around your kids and happy with who they are, because there's a lot of parents that kind of have an idea of exactly who they want their kids to be, and children deviate. Children are going to be who they want to be.
That's
You
correct.
can't force a kid to be one way or another. You see it all the time with siblings. Me and my siblings, same biological parents, all raised under the same roof, drastically different. From my oldest sister to my other sister to me to my brother, we're all very, very different. And it's just like you can't force a child to be one way or another.
No, you can't force that at all. It's and the harder you try, sometimes the harder the children rebel.
Yes.
It's a and it's a difficult thing to learn as a parent. Uh, my oldest son often talks to me about how much nicer I am to his younger siblings, and my standard answer was, I mess with him about this. I go, well, that's because I love them more, But we laugh about it. But the fact is, you know, I became a parent at 17, and then again at 19, and then again at 22. And then, it was then again at 44, 45.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's I finally got a vasectomy. So I was tired of becoming a parent. So
I think that's wise.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
The best thing I ever did for any kids I might have had.
Yeah.
So, not again.
For your potential
Yeah,
future.
right.
Yeah.
But first of all, you have to love your children, and whether you love them wisely or stupidly, it's a matter of intelligence and maturity. And I can see that I was a much better parent to kids I had in my 40s, the kids that I had in my 20s.
Mm. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Because you're still a kid when you're 17 and 19 and you're trying to raise a kid. How's a kid going to raise a kid?
Well, I was still too militaristic
Okay.
when my children, I still had a military mindset. So, You have to make your bed. You have to, you have to put your shoes in a certain place, and I would not punish, but maybe berate my children for not being as militaristic as I think they should be
Right.
at age 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah, and I've
You know,
seen that ruin kids. I've seen that just drive kids
correct,
just
correct. And I realized that I was fortunate enough to realize that while I was in the process of doing it.
yeah.
And my first wife, was always fighting me in that. And I finally figured out she was correct, you know. And I backed off, let my children be. And, they turned out how they turned out. Uh, but that's an interesting thing we have to be aware of who we are when we're dealing with our children. The great book on transactional analysis, has parent, is adult to adult, child, parent, parent, child. We can be, I mean, I saw you deal with your mom today, who was a lovely lady, by the way.
Thanks.
And, it was like there was a sense of love in that. There was a sense of caring, but there was a sense of mutual adult respect,
Yes.
And your mother's treating you like an adult, and that's a good thing. And you're treating your mother like an adult, but there's still the child to mother and mother to child love is visible.
Mm-hmm.
But the relationship is not a mom telling a kid what to do or a kid rebelling against his mom.
Right.
It was two adults dealing with each other in a loving, caring way,
Right.
which is, as it should be. And I think we all have to learn that at some point to be able to deal with our children.
I think that's
have it.
very wise.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very wise. That's my point about trying to parents who want their kids to fit into a certain mold and they refuse to accept the reality of that's not who your child is. Your child is never going to be that person. And you got to just let them be. And I feel like it causes unnecessary strain on the relationships both ways. It makes the kids not want to be around the parents because the parents are always telling them that they're not who they should be or who the parents want them to be. And so the kids are always upset. They feel like they're inadequate or that their parents don't approve of them. The parents are always upset because, the kid's not being who they want them to be. And the whole thing is just bad. Now, obviously I don't have kids. And so I don't know how exactly I would take it if I had children and some of them were acting in a way that I didn't think was right. I think that would be a difficult thing to deal with. But at some point, like you said, when somebody's, 25, 30, 35, I mean, until when are you going to keep trying to correct your kid? At some point, they're not a kid anymore. They're your kid, but they're an adult and you just got to let them live their life.
That's correct. That's correct. The whole thing is, I once heard a wonderful, I forgot where I heard this from, but it was a wonderful statement. And it was, you have to give your child enough love to make him strong for all the shit he's going to see in life.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. You have to love your child. You can't be cruel. You can't be mean. You can't demean the child. You can't, you can't put that child down. You can't work on lowering that child's self-esteem. And by the same token, not raising that child's self-esteem falsely.
Yeah.
Looking at that kid and saying, you failed, but guess what? You get to try again.
Right.
Or, you don't get a participation trophy in life.
Yeah, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So coddling a kid on the one hand is not wise, and being mean to the kid is likewise not wise.
Sure.
It's enough about kids. Let's talk about war.
Yeah. So you have a list here that's called the Blacklist.
You asked me to bring a memento from Vietnam.
I'm going to pull it up so people can see it. But yeah, tell us about it.
That is a list we were given so that when we saw villagers, we would ask them for identification. And if they were on that list, we would arrest them. That list was made up by informants who were in contact with the CIA. And then the CIA would make those lists available to us So can I have the list, for example?
Yes, I'm trying to pull it
Yeah.
up so that people can see
All right.
it. It's giving me a little bit of trouble, but I should be able to figure it out here
It's
soon.
called the Blacklist Trio I Village. And it's got a whole bunch of people listed on it. Here's 4 pages. I wasn't supposed to ever take this home. It was some kind of violation of the Secrets Act or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But I took it anyway for a variety of reasons. And it says, for example, I'm going to give it to you. It says Duong An, age 27, position Viet Cong suspect, weapon unknown. Let me find a guy right here. Nguyen Sen, age 29, position guerrilla, weapon, Russian rifle, which means an AK-47.
Uh-huh.
And over here it says Lee Ditch, 31, guerrilla, weapon, rifle, which could have been any old rifle. Then we have Nguyen Ding Dong Luong, age unknown, secretary, cadre, village leader, weapon unknown. Here we have another guy, An Huan, 25, guerrilla, weapon, Mauser. Then Fan Lai, 24, guerrilla, Russian rifle. So these were lists suspects. And we carried these lists with us on our patrols.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody we ran into, daytime patrols, we would ask them for identification. Everybody carried identification.
I finally got it. I think. I hope. I think so.
And so, if they were on this list, we would arrest them.
Uh-huh.
And if they resisted, we had the authority to kill them. And that seldom happened. And if we found you with a firearm, I'm trying to think if we ever found during daylight patrols anybody with a firearm. I really don't remember if we did or not. But if we found you with a firearm, we would seize the firearm, of course, and if you resisted, we would just shoot you down.
And this is all when you were about 18 to 21?
I joined the Navy shortly after age 17. And by the age of 18, I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
I was an 18-year-old kid doing this. Actually,
that's difficult to imagine. An 18-year-old kid doing that. I mean, I know it's common. People join the military at 18, but
I joined at 17.
Yeah.
So you couldn't go into a war zone until you were 18.
Uh-huh.
You're not allowed to legally get killed in war until you're 18.
How nice. But just seeing kids, like when I see 18-year-olds, I mean, they're children. And we, for some reason, have set we drew our line in the sand as like 18-year-old makes you an adult. And I look at 18-year-olds and I'm like, they're kids. All right, we don't even let them drink. You can't buy alcohol when you're 18. Now you can't buy tobacco either when you're 18.
Oh, really?
But you can go to war.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
Well, you know.
But also at 18, you as a boy, especially an 18-year-old boy, is when you're probably really hyped to blow some shit up.
Well, you know, you're moldable at that age.
True.
You know, that's why they don't draft guys over the age of 26. Because, you know, a 27, 28-year-old, you tell them, you know, we have to take that hill. And a 27-year-old will look at you and go, why? An 18-year-old boy will go, okay, let's go.
Right.
Also, biologically, if you look at history, you know, warriorhood started at age 12, 13, 14, 15.
Early, yeah.
I have fought child soldiers. You know, we'd be in a firefight. You know, then you look at the bodies, you see kids. You know, there could have been more than 11, 12, 13, but they were trying to kill you too.
Right.
The same thing. I don't think it's really difficult in Vietnam to tell whether you were fighting child soldiers, but sometimes you saw women or dead the dead bodies of women or the dead bodies of enemy, a male enemy that looked awfully young. Just in terms of size, even though the Vietnamese were smaller than us, and it's difficult to gauge an Oriental's age, especially when you're looking at a body.
Right, right.
Whether they're 14 or 18.
Especially if they got shot in the head.
Yeah, you don't get to see it.
Have you seen the movie Lord of War?
No.
It's a fantastic movie. One of the few Nicolas Cage movies that I really like.
Oh, is that where he's selling fire? Guns?
Yes, he's a gun runner.
Yeah.
He becomes a gun runner, and one of the warlords that he's dealing with, I believe, African warlord, said something along the lines of, "A bullet from a 10-year-old is just as effective as a bullet from a 30-year-old.
Yeah,
Oftentimes more effective."
Yes, because it's been my experience. This is from Africa, not from Vietnam, and from Latin America, that oftentimes 12, 13-year-old boys are more adventurous and more brave than adult men, and are often used as cannon fodder.
Wow.
Go out there and see, if they want to draw your fire to gauge your position, they may send kids after you, and kids are thoughtless enough, to do so.
Sure.
And I'll tell you something. There's nothing sadder than looking down and seeing a kid all shot up. There's no hardcore thing about it.
Yeah,
it's always a sobering, somber, oh my God, experience. And then you always have to go through their dead bodies. You always have to pilfer. Well, in most wars, when you're walking after a firefight, part of your job is to go out and pilfer the belongings of the dead enemy so that you can gauge what unit they belong to, who they are. And then you just kind of bag all that stuff. You turn it over to intelligence. But sometimes we would see the intel guys who would come and debrief us afterwards, go through this stuff. You see some guy's picture with his parents, and it's, and you always wonder, how would my mom feel?
right.
If somebody was I was the dead body and somebody was looking at a picture of me and my mom.
Right.
Which, by the way, here's an interesting thing. Anytime an American died, we would always put all his gear together, but we would go through his wallet and his personal belongings and take out the photograph of any female in his belongings. And that is because you didn't know if he was his girlfriend or he was married. Could have been a granny looking photo. It's going in the garbage.
Could have been the mistress.
You don't know who it is. You don't want to send any photographs of any females home. A woman and 2 kids, it's the guy's wife, in the garbage.
What if it was a picture of a guy and turned out to be his boyfriend, and he's meanwhile he's married with 2 kids?
There you go. Well, that's...
Did you leave the pictures of the guys?
Typically, most guys didn't carry pictures of the guys unless it was their dad or their brother, and he's in the picture. A guy with his dad or something, and being gay back there was not accepted.
Right.
So, nobody would suspect that. But the rule was you always cleaned out a guy's wallet or other personal belongings. You would go in a guy's, let's say, sea chest, and if he had like a little album of photos from home, every female in the garbage.
Yeah.
You never sent that stuff home.
I'll tell you what, I just got back from Seattle. You talk about gay was not accepted back then. I've never seen so many rainbow flags in my life. Every building, every storefront, every cafe, all up and down the street. I mean, Seattle is covered in rainbow flags.
Well, they're catering to the local, community.
Yes.
Any town that becomes a social safe haven, for alternate lifestyles, the local businesses will want to cater to them.
Of course.
You know, I mean,
of course. Well, I mean, that's actually exactly what I was thinking about.
You
when
know,
I
you
saw,
go ahead.
I saw rainbow flags at, I think it was, pretty sure it was Whole Foods. And I sat there and I thought about it for a second, and I thought, okay, this is not a corporate policy. This is not Whole Foods in and of itself is not out there saying we support the gay community. Because you go to Whole Foods here in El Paso, there's no rainbow flag.
Absolutely.
I went to like 2 different locations in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago. Even in Austin, didn't see any rainbow flags. But over there, in order to remain competitive in the market, right? How can we bring people? How can we encourage them to come into our doors to give us their money?
Well,
so they put up rainbow flags.
Well, you know, in El Paso, you might see in Whole Foods, you know, a picture of the Virgin of Guadalupe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You understand?
You might. Yeah.
So that's you know, that's catering to the local markets and try to identify with the local population. We're with you. We're part of you. We're like you. Come here and do business with us.
Sure.
You know, and most businesses will do that.
Oh, sure.
You know, regardless of where you go. It's an interesting thing about, you know, Texas. You know, Texas is such a wonderful place because it's so diverse. It's so, you know, we live in a democratic town that believes in open carry.
Right. Right.
You know,
well, that's one thing that I feel like that's the one area we might have talked about this the last time you were on the show. I don't remember. I feel like the one area where most Democrats veer from the total identity of that group is the Second Amendment. I mean, I think it's safe to say that you're pretty left on most issues.
Yes.
But you support the Second Amendment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I started carrying a gun at age 15 in Chicago.
Right.
Absolutely illegal.
Right.
You know, I took a 1911 to school every day. You know, when I got to school, I would carry my 1911 stick it in my belt, and you know, hammer cocked back, safety on, a thumb safety on.
That's what they call cocked and locked.
Cocked and locked. That's correct. You know, condition, what is it? 1, 2, or 3? I forgot what the condition is.
Yeah, I don't know that stuff.
Yeah, but anyway, I did that for years because there was a legitimate bad guy after me. And I was...
When you were 15?
Oh, yeah.
What was he after you for at 15?
I stabbed him.
Of course you did.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. Let me explain that.
Oh my goodness.
Let me explain that.
Yeah,
I was a lifeguard. I was a lifeguard at the Holiday Inn on Lawrence and Sheridan.
Oh my God.
And every day I would walk north, I would walk west to Lawrence and Broadway to thumb a ride home.
Uh-huh.
One day I got picked up by a gigantic man in a gray Cadillac. And I told him I was going, and Lawrence is 4,500, if I recall, and Devon is 6,400. So I was going along Broadway, and I live close to Devon and Broadway. I live 2 blocks west of Devon and Broadway. So that's driving north from the 4,500 block of Broadway to the 6,400 block of Broadway, which is about a 20-minute ride. And during the minute I got in, the guy started talking to me about that he had just come from a stag party and that they had shown porn films. And now I'm 15 at the time.
Real quick, what's a stag party? I don't know if I've
Stag
ever heard
party
that before.
Is a bachelor party.
Oh, okay.
The old-fashioned, but part of the deal was that they showed porn films.
Okay.
So the guy starts describing the porn film he had seen. And he's giving me a great description. And I start getting a little woody, you know, and then it dawns on me that this guy's trying to turn me on. I mean, this guy's talking shit to me that no adult should be talking to a 15-year-old kid.
Right.
Having said that, how was I dressed? I was wearing penny loafers. I was wearing Levi's, a button-down shirt. Okay. And I looked like very collegiate, very clean cut. I always dress that way.
Uh-huh.
So, but I got a switchblade in my pocket. genuine Italian switchblade bought on Maxwell Street for $10,
Nice.
which would have been about 150 nowadays. No, 300 nowadays. It was the real thing, really made in Italy, not some cheap Chinese knockoff.
Right.
It was the real thing. I was never without it as a kid. So, and I'm a lifeguard. So I'm a clean living boy, you know. So the guy starts talking to me, and then I figured out, oh shit, you know, this guy's trying to turn me on. Then I remembered that there had been a newspaper article about 3 boys who were found in Skokie Woods, murdered, with their testicles cut off and stuffed in their mouth.
Oh, shit.
2 brothers and a friend of theirs, ages 15, 14, and 15, who had last been seen exiting a movie theater around Lincolnwood, which was close to where I lived, and getting in a car with a large man in a gray Cadillac. And I'm in a car with a large man in a gray Cadillac who's talking shit to me, pouring shit to me.
Wow.
And I decided to test the waters. I said, you know what? I changed my mind. Why don't you drop me off on Bryn Mawr, which is short of Devon? He goes, no. He goes, listen, why don't we go to my place? You know, maybe we could watch some porn movies and I'll get us a couple of hookers. And at that point, I know I'm in deep shit.
Right.
I said, no, I made up a story. You know, my father's waiting for me. My father was living in Mexico at the time, you know, and if I don't show up, he's going to be concerned. The guy puts his hand on my lap, reaches over, puts his hand on my lap, says, no, let's go over to my place. You're going to be okay. Don't worry. We'll have a great time. Now he's driving like this. He's got his hand like this. So at that, I'd had about 5 years of karate. I started karate at age 10. So I put my left hand up here so that he couldn't strike back with his right hand, pulled down my switchblade, and I go, no, sir, you got to pull over and let me out. I'm holding my switchblade here. He hasn't seen it yet. He goes, no, let's go to my place. At that point, I stuck him in the right ribs. I said, pull the fuck over or I'm going to gut you. The guy pulled over, said, calm down, kid, calm down. It's like nothing happened to him.
Wow.
I had about 3 to 4 inches of blade in him in his right side, and the guy was just as calm as a cucumber.
Wow.
You know, he says, calm down, kid. I'll let you out. Don't worry about it. So now I'm getting blood all over me. I got my left hand by his right driving hand. I don't know how I'm going to pull the lever. You know, I said, don't, you know, I'm out of here. I said, if I don't get out, I'm good. You know, I'm going to stab you again and again and again. And I'd also been doing kendo for about 2 years, which is sword.
Right.
So, you know, I was pretty savvy in terms of knives and swords.
Yeah, but you're still talking about a 15-year-old kid.
I'm 15
against
years
a grown
old.
man.
Yeah, and I know I'm going to fucking die.
Right.
If, you know, this guy gets me into his house.
Right.
So I make it out of the car. I got the door open. I'm covered in his blood. I got blood from this guy all over. So he looks at me. He's been stabbed. He's bleeding. He's holding himself with his hand, with his left hand. And he looks at me and goes, I'm going to find you. I'm going to kill you, you little motherfucker. You're fucking dead. I'm going to kill you and your family. I was petrified.
Of course.
You know, I actually cut through a gangway, went to a street on the east of Devon. Forgot what the name of it is. I was shaking.
Of course.
You know, I took off my shirt and I threw it in a garbage can. I kept the switchblade, and I thought the guy would call the cops on me. I thought he would drive around and try to get me. All sorts of things were driving through my mind. So, you know, I crossed Devon Avenue, going west. I mean, I initially went east, and I crossed and I went west and I hid. Then I walked home the rest of the way. And I was petrified of this guy. When I got home, I didn't know how to handle this. I was afraid to tell my mom. I had stabbed a guy. You know, I thought I had done something bad.
Right. And
so I told my janitor, a guy named Charlie Bass, you know, an old Polish guy, you know, Oh boy, you need a gun. You know. So Charlie Bass bought me a, they used to sell them at hardware stores.
Yeah, right.
You
Yeah.
know, a 1911. You know, 45. Believe it or not, you know, I forgot who the manufacturer was, but it was a World War II surplus. They used to sell them as surplus. It was $25.
It's probably either a Colt or a Remington, I'm assuming.
I have no
Yeah.
idea what it was. I was too dumb to notice.
Right.
You know, and I started carrying it. And oddly enough, he taught me how to use it in our basement. You know, and we lived in a 6-flat, and all the neighbors were going, "What's going on?"
So you guys were shooting it in the basement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow.
You know, with the laundry and the sheds, everybody had a shed for extra stuff. You know, and everybody, all the tenants, the 6 other, there were 6 families in the building. It was a 6-flat. You know, oh, I'm teaching them how to shoot.
Wow.
Oh, okay. I mean, it was
what a time that was,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
somebody would just go buy a gun and give it to a kid and teach them how to shoot in the basement of an apartment building.
we're shooting telephone
I
poles.
mean, that's so crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
and we were
I mean,
shooting telephone poles.
nowadays,
I
shit.
know. It was
I
a
mean,
different time.
Yeah.
You know, he was a World War II veteran.
Nice.
Now this is 1960 what? 1? You know? So Charlie Bass was one of those guys who had been like a PFC all through Europe. You know, been in half a dozen major battles. You know, he was just an old guy, you know, taking care of a couple of buildings that I got
Right.
to know, became friendly with. So Charlie Bass taught me how to, you know, fire the 45. You know, and he taught me wrong too, because, you know, he used to use a teacup,
Right.
you know, the old teacup.
That's how it was back then.
Yeah, the old teacup.
Yeah, you see it in the movies.
Yeah, right.
It makes me cringe.
Right.
Yeah. Makes me cringe when you see it nowadays
Yeah.
in modern movies. I'm
That's
like,
right.
could you at least have taught that guy how to hold the gun? Come on.
There you
Yeah.
go. You know, so
Like,
you know,
no.
I'm doing a
Like, it's
teacup,
like,
or, you know, holding my wrist, and that sort
yeah.
of stuff. That's absolutely worthless. But I felt comfortable. Let me tell you what happened. So I did that. I would go to school every day, and we didn't have backpacks back then. We had gym bags. So I would go to school. The gun would be, and as I was going to school, I would have to walk 10 blocks. I would have to walk I was going to Senn High School. So I would have to walk from Devon to Ridge along Glenwood. It's about 10 blocks. And I was always looking out for this guy, because I had told him that I was going to Devon and Glenwood, you know, when I first got in the car. This big, you know, the big man,
Right.
the great Cadillac. And so I was always afraid that he would find me. So I began looking in gangways. If he pulled up on me now, where would I go? I would go down there. I'll wait at the other end of the gangway, and I'll pick him off when he comes in.
Right.
I was 15 years old, and I was thinking tactically.
Yep.
I was looking, you know, there's a mailbox. I can get behind this mailbox. There's a telephone pole. I can get behind this telephone pole. There's an entryway. I can get in that entryway and hold him off. So I began looking around me for spots where I would have the advantage,
Right.
if the man came after me. One day, I was sitting on the front steps of my apartment building with one of the young neighbors, a young woman by the name of Denise Caprillion. And we were just chatting. We always, you know, just kids talking, right? Well, we walked home together. And then I see what I thought was the same guy, but now he's driving a white Cadillac, and he's driving by real slowly, and he looked right at me. I was petrified. I reached in my bag to get my gun. I hadn't put my gun on my waist, and I fumbled around in my bag among my gym clothes, and I couldn't find my gun. And by the time I looked up to see what was happening, that white Cadillac was gone. But that taught me the greatest lesson in the world. Have it on you.
Oh, yeah.
Have it on you, have it on you, have it on you. I said, because if this guy jumped out of that car and started pumping lead into me, I'd still be fumbling
Yeah.
I'm on my jock strap,
Yeah.
you know, trying to get to my firearm.
Right.
And then having to pull it out in front of Denise, my neighbor, who would have been absolutely mortified, at the sight of a gun. I mean, we were just kids. We were 15-year-old, pretty innocent kids too,
Yeah. Yeah.
in a lot of ways. So I began on the way home. I typically also would carry it on me on the way home. Before I left school, I would go into the toilet, close the thing, take my gun out, put it in my waist, and then get out, flush the toilet and go home. And guess what? I still do that at airports. When I carry my firearm at an airport, I put it on in my luggage as I'm supposed to.
Yep.
I'll comply with all the rules and regulations of firearm transportation and air travel. But when I get to that airport and I pick up my gun, I'll go in the bathroom, load my magazine, put it around in the chamber as I flush the toilet to cover the noise.
Yep.
Put it on my waistband and walk out of that airport with a gun on my waist.
I do the exact same thing.
I'm sure there's a lot of us that do.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of us that do.
Except this trip I just took to Washington, Oregon. I got back to town yesterday about midnight. I looked at the reciprocity laws, and Texas does not have reciprocity with Washington and Oregon, so I didn't take a gun with me. I wasn't able to carry out there.
But you can always take it with
you. Yeah, you can take it with you, but if I can't carry it, what's the point? It's just to delay me at the TSA.
In your hotel.
Yeah, in my hotel. Yeah, sure. If somebody comes breaking into my hotel room, get it on me when I'm in a neighborhood where I don't know where the hell I'm at. This could be the worst part of town, and I'm a tourist. I've never been there before.
You want to know how to avoid that?
How do I avoid that?
Google Barnes and Noble.
Just don't
on your phone.
Uh-huh.
And that's the neighborhood you want to hang out at.
Oh. That's where all the white people are reading books.
That's right. Every time I go to a strange city on a case or on a matter or to talk to a client,
Barnes and Nobles or Banana Republic.
There you go. No, you Google Barnes and Noble. Not only that, you'll find good restaurants nearby. You'll find nice little, where was I? I was not in Kansas City. I was in Wichita, Kansas. I Googled Barnes and Noble, and sure enough, they had a lot of very, great pizza parlors. They had an ice cream shop like I've never seen before. They had the best ice cream shop I've ever seen in my life. And the ice cream shop also sold booze.
Mm.
So it was booze and ice cream.
Yeah.
And it was
they can make
elegant.
those floats.
It was elegant and upscale. And right next to it was a brick oven pizza joint.
Fantastic.
And Barnes and Noble was, a half-minute drive from where, So you always Google the Barnes and Noble. You'll be in a nice neighborhood.
Now I know.
Yeah,
I had an incredible pizza in Portland, Oregon, a couple of days ago. It's fantastic. Really, really good. I tried to go back the next day, but I guess they opened late, and I had to catch my flight, so I wasn't able to go. But Seattle got me thinking about a conversation we had the last time you were here about soft men, and you said you like those guys because it's easier to take their shit from them.
Yeah.
I felt like just driving through Seattle that over 90% of the men that I saw, I could walk up to them and say, "Give me your wallet or I'm going to slap you." And they would just give me their wallet.
Isn't that wonderful?
I don't know if it's wonderful.
No, it is wonderful as long as you're not one of them.
Well, it's not wonderful when another country comes in here and makes the same demands of us.
Well, that's not going to happen because there are too many of us with a warrior ethic.
That's true.
But just merely, and let me tell you, one of the things that you and I have gone back and forth on in the last couple of days is there's a place for those guys. There's a place for those guys. They go to work. They contribute to economics, and you can be the biggest wimp and the best family man in the world.
Sure.
And that to me is a more important role, than being a Navy SEAL.
Sure.
Because it's I see all these guys that are quitting the SEALs or retiring, and they all want to be professional former SEALs. I'm going to teach people how to shoot. I'm going to run this class. None of these guys think about, I have to go to college. I have to go to graduate school. I have to do this. I have to do that. They all want to stand in the glory of being, but a wimp guy never has that.
But
You
why?
know,
Why is one better than the other? Why is being the way you're putting it, a soft kind of guy who goes to work, provides for his family, better than being a ex Navy SEAL who wants to teach people how to shoot?
I'll tell you why. Because the total contribution to society is better if you have men who stay with their families, who raise their sons, who raise, who provide for their families, who contribute to the economy, who contribute to the social stability of our society. Now, there's nothing wrong with being, a former SEAL that wants to teach people how to handle, dangerous situations. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Right.
And I'm sure many of those guys use that to provide for their families, just like anybody else.
Right.
It's just a matter of where you end up. And they're not mutually exclusive either,
Right.
you know. But when we look at, what we call masculine traits, we very often fail to note that one of the greatest masculine traits we have in our America is men who dedicate themselves to the raising of their families, to the feeding of their families, to the providing of their families,
Good point.
regardless of how they may, what's the word that I'm looking for? How they may measure up to our physical macho standards. Um, you know, I'm a martial artist. I'm a shooter. I've been training, continue to do so at age 74. I've been training since age 10. I've been in numerous fights, both physical and with firearms, and I'm more proud of having provided for my family than anything I have done along those other lines.
Sure. I mean, you can do both, though.
You
I
can,
think,
yes.
yeah, I think you're drawing these two pictures, and this is kind of the problem with having discussions on Facebook, is you're kind of limited to, typing up your comments,
Yeah.
and I never want to type multiple paragraphs.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Ouch.
so it's kind of like, point as briefly as possible. But the last conversation we had, where we went back and forth, you presented one example, which is a guy who is a weak kind of man who is going to work, providing for his family, and that's very admirable, and that's awesome. And I agree that I'd rather have that kind of guy over the other kind of person that you presented, which is a masculine asshole who goes around getting drunk at bars and starting fights. That's definitely not helpful in society in any kind of way. So I would absolutely take the other guy. My point was that you can be both. You can be a masculine guy. For me, does not mean that you go around getting drunk and starting fights. Where I come from in the Middle East, being a man means exactly what you described, which is you take care of your family.
There you go.
You look after your mother, your sisters, you take care of your kids. You go to work, you put food on the table. Those are the kinds of things that a man does. You defend your honor. That's what a man is. A man is not somebody who goes and gets in fights. That's an idiot.
That's correct. Okay. Yeah. No, we agree.
Yeah.
But
I think we do. Yeah. We were
yeah.
kind of, it was the whole Facebook thing kind of.
But what I think is, when we look at masculinity in the United States, and perhaps it's because we've been involved in war for so long,
continuously forever.
Yeah, since 2001. And we have,
well, ever since the establishment of the country. I mean, we've been in a major war every 20 years for the last.
Well, I don't think
300 years.
I don't think we've been out of a war for 20 years.
Right. Yeah. We're always at war.
But we're always at war somewhere, and so there's a militaristic ethic or model that a lot of people want to comply with, And you don't necessarily have to comply with that in order to be a viable male in society. You know,
Agreed. Yeah.
uh, there are some of us with, I think, more aggressive tendencies,
Sure.
that can go toward the militaristic, even in civilian life, um, view of the world. But that doesn't mean we're going to neglect our other masculine duties, which is, as you say, provide for your family, take care of your family, protect your family.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
One of the number one of the biggest traits of being a so-called alpha male is looking out for your tribe.
Yeah.
Like the alpha wolf walks at the end of the pride and looks out for the other wolves, make sure that everybody's taken care of, nobody's left behind. That's one of the characteristics of being an alpha. An alpha is not some guy who comes home and gets drunk and beats his wife and kids. It's somebody who looks out for his family.
That's correct. No, that's absolutely correct. But if you can't look out, even if you can't walk, even if you're not an alpha male, you're still a viable male
Sure.
if you take care of your family.
Yep.
And actually, sometimes when I look back on my life and I see the violent confrontations I've been involved in, part of that I think is because of that alpha gene, that
Conquer.
no, not so much as fuck it, I can handle this.
Ah.
And a particular incident comes to mind. There was a place called Cabrini Green in Chicago. It was a notorious ghetto. It's been recently gentrified, and they're now upscale condos, you know. Um, but at one point, it was really bad. I remember walking down the stairs of Cabrini Green on a January night with a paper bag with $70,000 in cash from a fee that I just collected on the 13th floor. And when I tried to take the elevator down, it wasn't working anymore. Right? So I'm walking down 13 flights of stairs. I got $70,000 in a bag in one hand and a 45 in the other hand, and a 1911 Colt. Back then I was a Colt guy. People just looked at, and there were a couple of young 3 a.m. And people looking at me and saying, and me, when the people who had paid me that money offered to walk down with me, I said, no, I got it. I should have asked for an escort down there, right? But that alphaness that made me think, fine, let somebody come after my 70 G's and see what happens.
Right.
I didn't need to be that way. And I'm thinking, well, what if somebody had come? What if somebody had come after the white guy, wearing, I was wearing a suit, I was wearing an overcoat with a scarf and a fedora, it was 15 degrees out, and I'm walking down open stairs, 13 flights,
Right.
And then walk to my car, get in my car, throw the, in front of a bunch of tough guys. And I'm saying,
Probably not very
what if I
wise.
had to kill somebody that night? Why was I being such a dick and putting out that kind of challenge to the local community?
Right.
I didn't need to do that. I could have cost somebody else. See, I'm still thinking like a dick because, I could have killed some. It didn't occur to me that I would be killed.
Right. Yeah, that never does.
Yeah. But at that point, I was what, 37, 38 years old? Couldn't give a shit. And that up to a very certain, up until my mid 40s was the story of my life.
So you mellowed out after your mid 40s, or you just became wiser. You started to reflect on things and say, you know what, that's an unnecessary risk.
Correct. Not only that.
So was it an alpha factor, or was it a lack of wisdom?
Both. Just like a challenge to the world. Fuck you,
Right.
come take me.
Right.
If you can.
Just walking around pounding your chest.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. You know, and here I was, a guy with a law degree, you know, and thinking, you know,
Why were you in that guy's apartment? Why didn't he go to your office?
you don't go to people. Yeah, they don't go to your office. You know,
Because that sounds like a risk right there. It's better to have him come to your office.
70,000 in cash. I ain't going to your office, Mr. Ken. Where
40,
you at?
40 years ago.
Yeah. Where you at? I'm in such and such. Well, I'll be over.
Right.
What time you going to be home? 3 a.m. Okay, I'll see you at 3 a.m.
Yeah. You know? I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
I've done business at 4 a.m. in bars. It's just it was the nature of the practice back then. Would I do that now? No. I'm too old to stay up that late.
Right. And you don't need the 70.
No. I didn't need them then. You know, I was making great money. But, you know, that's the way stuff worked.
Right.
You know, I'll come over to your house and pick up $100,000 in a briefcase.
Jeez.
You know.
How did you get that money deposited? What'd you do with it?
Well, what I always would do was...
I guess you could just put it in the bank and claim it on your taxes as
that's
income.
exactly what you do.
You don't need to,
No, that's exactly what you do. You put...
Nobody's going to question where a criminal defense attorney is getting cash from.
No. Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, they did once, a couple of times. But I could walk into a bank and they go, well, we have to fill out a cash transaction reporting form. Fill it out.
Right.
Which, you know, Kendall Valle brought in $70,000 in cash. There you go.
Right.
What I typically would do is I would put it in a box, then write my checks and pay my bills, then take money out of the box to cover what I had done.
Right.
What I had written. And it was just a matter of convenience, you know, not a matter of, I wasn't trying to hide the fact that I had a $70,000 fee or $100,000 fee, or one time, you know, a $700,000 fee, which I had to hire a whole bunch of other lawyers, you know, with. But, you know, here it is. It's in the bank, you know. And at a certain point, my bank reported me for suspicious transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And the FBI interviewed me. And I told them, you know, here's what it is. Boom, boom.
FBI?
Yeah, the FBI came down.
Not the IRS?
No, it was the FBI. 2 FBI agents came to my office.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted to know, you know, did you deposit? Yeah, I did this. And what was going on was, it was the bond system, you know. So if you got busted, you got $1 million bond, 10%. So that would mean 100,000, right? So I would have to go to the Cook County jail with 100,000 in cash.
Right.
And there were 2 little old guys, I kid you not, back then, you know, right out of a movie, you know, eye shades, garters on their arms, and they would count the money. There was actually times I spent 8 hours waiting for these guys.
Oh, God.
You know, you walk in at 11 p.m., you know, you walk out at 4 a.m. with your bond receipt. Oh, no, it was just horrendous.
Right.
You know, and then double. So what I started doing is, rather than taking the money that clients were bringing me, I would call the bank up and say, I'm bringing in 100,000. I'm bringing in 50,000. I'm bringing on 70,000. I'm bringing on 20,000. I'm going to give you 20s, 1s, 10s, whatever, and you're going to give me hundreds and packages of 2,000. So the bank reported me. You know, they thought maybe I was money laundering.
Right.
So what I was able to show the FBI was that if today I exchanged a bunch of old 20s for 100,000 in hundreds, you know, that same afternoon, here's the bond slip where I paid that 100,000 to Cook County to get the guy out. And the great benefit of that, to me as an attorney, was that you could work for the bond money. You understand? Your client would sign what's called a CBR, cash bond receipt to attorney. So you didn't have to pay me and pay bond. All you had to do was pay bond, post your bond, and then the next court appearance, you would sign your cash bond receipt to attorney.
Right.
So if you posted 100,000, my fee might be 50,000. So I would write up a motion. The judge would enter and continue it until the end of the case. So at the end of the case, I knew I was going to get paid.
Right.
My money was secure. And it was a great system because then the guy didn't have to get appointed counsel. The county didn't have to spend money, but I was going to get paid what I was going to get paid.
Right.
Whether it be 10,000, 20, up to 100. And typically the county, whatever the amount was, would take a 10% discount. So if you posted 100,000, you had 90,000 to work with in terms of your fee. In case of a serious drug case or a murder case or something, I knew I could bust my ass trying to defend my client because he had signed off, let's say, out of 100,000, there was 90,000 left after the county took 10%, and then I would have 50,000 to work the case.
Nice.
So I could spend, money on investigators,
Sure.
and so forth and so on, and provide good criminal defense.
Sure.
So it was a great system. So it was to my benefit to take the money to the bank, have it turn into hundreds, and unfortunately there were no $500 bills back then.
Mm-hmm.
But
boy, they don't make those anymore, do they? Or maybe if they make them, they're very, very rare and highly collectible. 500s and $1,000 bills. I know a guy who's got a few, and I tried to buy one from him, but he wanted like $1,500 for the $1,000 bill. I was like, come on, man. I would like to have $1,000 bill, but I'm not going to pay $1,500 for it. Although it's probably as a collectible, it's probably not a bad idea because 10, 20 years from now, I'm going to get that and then some. If I'm looking at it as a collectible, like somebody buys a piece of jewelry and says, well, in 20 years, this is going to be worth more, that kind of thing. But I don't know. I'm not into collecting stuff because it just makes, just means you have to look after it. Yeah, it just means you have to look after it. I don't keep anything around me that I don't have use for. Like of course, I'm a big gun guy and I worked at a gun shop for 5 years. And people always ask me this question when they find out I worked at a gun store. Oh my God, you must have a lot of guns. It's like, well, first of all, that depends on what you mean by a lot. But really, I don't have anything that I don't use. It's either a tactical gun that I carry. It's either something that's in my nightstand. It's something that I use for competition or something that I use for hunting. And I don't keep stuff around. As much as I like the Remington Rands, you were talking about World War II guns.
Yeah.
When Remington started making 1911s in World War II, because Remington was not making guns at the time. They were making something else that had to do with steel. I don't know what they were producing, but then they decided to start making 1911 pistols because there was such a demand for it. They followed the Colt blueprint step by step, and they made a phenomenal 1911. They made a really good one. It kind of fits kind of loosely and it rattles. Like when you shake it, it rattles. You know what I mean? I've always wanted a Remington Rand, but am I going to pay? And I found there was a guy who brought in a collection one time to the shop.
Yeah, I saw that collection.
Pristine Remington Rands and old Colts. I mean, just beautiful. Not a scratch anywhere. I mean, they were amazing. He even had the triggers and the backstrap zip tied. So you could tell like he doesn't even cock the slide. These are just he's been collecting them for like 50 years. And I'm like, it's $3,000 for a gun that I'm just going to have to put in my safe and worry about getting stolen and that kind of thing. I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to shoot that Remington Rand. It's beautiful. It's old. So I never bought one.
I got to the point where I had 11 1911s.
Yeah. I love 1911s.
Yeah, I'm down to 3.
That's probably a good amount.
Yeah, precisely. But I never carry them.
Well, but you're a SIG guy.
Yeah,
you like SIG.
Yeah.
What's so cool about SIG? You still carry 40?
No, I carry 357s.
Oh, okay.
And that's because I don't want to have to shoot anybody twice.
Right. I don't think you'll have to with that round.
No. I carry SIGs, 357 SIG caliber, 226s, because to me they are probably the most convenient guns for the way I carry. I don't use a holster.
226, really? That's a big gun.
Yeah, I use a clip draw.
Yeah.
So I never use holsters. So it sits way down, and when I tuck it in, I can keep my thumb on top of the hammer.
Right.
And I don't mind double action, single action, but but I like the round.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
It's very powerful.
well, there's an old saying: "It'll hit your asshole. It'll hit your elbow, come out your asshole." You know, uh, and that'll stop an aggressor relatively faster than a 9mm, much faster.
Yeah, I think so too.
You know,
I think so too. I go back and forth between 9 and 45. I like 45, but sometimes carrying a full size 1911 is just a bit too heavy if I'm carrying it all day. It's a little bit too big. But also, most days I'm wearing suits, so concealing a 1911 is not a problem if you're wearing a suit.
that's right. That's the great thing about it.
It helps a lot.
Especially if you put a clip draw on it.
Yeah,
I carried a 1911 in war for years.
right.
And I never put the thumb safety on. I always relied on the web of the hand safety.
Mm.
So part of my job was, let's say we did an ambush, and when the smoke settles, first of all, you always start an ambush at knee level.
What does that mean?
At knee level, you don't shoot upper torso.
Oh, so okay, really?
Yeah, you shoot knee level. Back then, we had 20-round magazines and fully automatic fire.
M16s.
M16s. So you shoot one, then you reload two.
That seems like a weird strategy. Why is
Well,
that?
because the guys will drop down.
But why not just shoot them in a combat effective zone initially and take them out?
If let's say if you're a straight line ambush, right? And you got 10 to 15 guys, you're spread maybe 3 yards apart. And there's always 5 Americans in a various numbers of popular forces. So let's say there's 10 guys and you're 3 feet apart. The Americans will have M16s. The PFs had carbines, M1 or M2 fully automatic carbines, and everybody shoots at knee level. That's because the minute you open up, you pop claymores first. At the same time you're popping claymores, which go at a 60% angle. You're shooting at lean level because the minute an ambush happens, people will drop to the ground.
Right.
So you want to catch them on the way down.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
You want to catch them on the way down.
Gotcha.
Ankle level, and you're shooting them. Once the smoke settles, you send out a search team. And, the call comes out, search team out. I was always part of the search team. I always had an interpreter with me. The interpreter would be telling any possibly live enemy who were still alive. He would call out, Boxy, this is a doctor. I was a medic. I was a corpsman.
Right.
And my job was to see if anybody was alive, if we could take them as prisoners for interrogation or whatever. Meanwhile, there were some other guys pilfering all the belongings of all the dead guys, just throwing them to what we used to call booty bags, satchels over your shoulder, grab a guy's wallet, rip off the patch insignia that he had on, that sort of thing. Sometimes when you did that, some guys who were not yet dead would try to kill you. So I had a Unit 1 in my left hand, right? My medical kit, and my 45 in my right hand. And I never put the thumb safety on.
Okay.
Even though, because I would go to render medical aid to somebody, and all of a sudden he would turn on me, or, if he had a sidearm or something. We always made sure that any rifles or anything like that. Well, you can usually tell who the officers were by their helmets and also by their belts and their gear. So, and officers sometimes carried sidearms, Chicom pistols. And sometimes they would turn to you, just have to shoot them real fast.
Right.
And so it was.
So you relied, because that's got a dangerous thing to do with a 1911. Did you have the hammer cocked? I'm assuming.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so you were relying on the backstrap safety.
No, I had the backstrap depressed too.
Oh, really?
I'm relying on the 3-pound trigger.
Okay.
And
That's a
90% of the time,
that's a dangerous thing to do.
yeah, 90% of the time, my hand was already on the trigger.
Wow. I guess in that kind of situation, it might have been okay. Certainly not recommended for anybody who's looking to conceal carry a 1911.
Oh, absolutely
yeah,
not.
you got to put that safety
No,
on.
no. Yeah, put the safety on. But one of the interesting things that happened was, for when I first started to conceal carry, I carried a 1911. And then I went to the clip draw, which is just a clip on the side of the firearm. And I had, camera cocked, safety on. Because I did, my old days of just trusting the backstrap were a little bit, I had grown more cautious over the years. But I would sometimes find it's just rubbing up against my body.
Is that your wife calling?
Yeah.
She has to call.
No.
Every time you come on the show, she calls. We can't break that tradition.
No, that's not her. That's an old, as a matter of fact, it's an old wartime buddy.
Oh,
but my life, by the way.
Nice.
So yeah. So I would find that rubbing up against my body would take off the thumb safety.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it could. Yeah.
So the more I would reach, at the end of the day, to pull my gun out and say, shit, I've been carrying all day without the thumb safety.
And this is without a holster, I'm assuming.
Yeah, without a holster.
Right. That's why you need a holster for those kinds of guns.
Not really. But
I would not feel comfortable carrying a single action gun with the hammer cocked and the safety off.
You have to rely on the web of the hand safety.
Yeah, it's too much risk that I'll shoot one of my testicles off, or probably both.
Yeah.
Both
no. There's always that concern. There's always, you're always thinking that. But what happened was, when the two-sided thumb safeties, started coming in, lefty thumb safeties.
Yes.
I
don't like those.
Well, what happened was, that way I could just reach down and check and make sure my thumb safety was on.
Let me ask you this. You had another list with you that had something to do with artillery tactics or something?
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to get to that. I don't have a picture of that to show people, but I can hold it up to the camera.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Just this right side here.
Okay. Let's see. This part?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here.
Right there.
This is kind of very low tech.
Yeah, very low tech.
I should have uploaded it.
That's an actual original document from Vietnam.
And so what's this telling people?
Okay, I'll tell you right now.
5 requirements for artillery.
There you go.
All right, tell us about that.
Number 1, identification of caller. You have to identify yourself. Number 2, you have to request a fire mission. Number 3, target location by grid of 6 digits. Send azimuth. You have to send your azimuth.
Send what?
Azimuth.
What is that?
It's you're shooting an azimuth with a compass.
Okay.
The military style compass.
Okay.
Style 4. Target description. And under target description says location, geography. 2, number of enemy. And item number 5, method of fire control. Adjust fire, fire for effect, cannot observe. Those are the basics for calling in an artillery strike. Now, the great thing about where I was in many times is that we have what's called preset artillery. So if my compound has 4 corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, I can take the center of these 2 corners, walk out 100 yards, and then already have an artillery set to drop high explosive or whatever on that place. So all around you, around your compound, you have preset artillery where you can just call it in and go preset artillery, fire for effect, or well, you very seldom say fire for effect the first time because you want to see where the rounds are landing.
God damn, we're so inventive, aren't we?
Yeah.
We just we come up with ways first to kill each other. Just with rocks and sticks and things like that, and then we
Sticks are good.
and then we come up with swords and spears and bow and arrow, and then we try to figure out how to kill each other on horseback, and then we try to figure out how to shoot each other at a distance, and then we want to do it from the sky, and then we want to do it on the sea, and then we want to do it underwater. It's just like we just keep trying to find
Predatory. We're
keep
predatory.
trying to find ways to.
We're a predatory species.
We are.
We're a predatory
Somebody's
species.
always trying to take over somebody, and you have to protect yourself.
Well, you know, if you kind of look at the history of mankind and realize that up until 12,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
And typically could not live in groups of over 100 people because the environment would not survive them. They could not survive in the environment, you know,
Right.
100 people picking up what's around them,
Yeah,
which is,
berries and things. Yeah.
yeah, and hunter-gatherers.
Right.
And then we discovered agriculture about 12,000 years ago.
Well, we sort of invented agriculture out of the want for more beer. It was when in Mesopotamia they discovered, quite possibly by accident, that barley left out in jars under the rain for a couple of days would ferment, and it would become.
So let's grow more barley.
So yeah, they did. So that there's a lot of historians that suggest that that's actually what started the modern world. That's what caused people to settle down in one area and grow the desire for more barley.
It's agriculture.
The desire for beer. That's what started agriculture, and then that led to the invention of the wheel, the plow, geometry,
Absolutely.
accounting. That's really what started the modern world, is the want for beer.
Well, that's
the Star Spangled Banner is
an old beer song.
An old beer song. And people would sing it to determine how sober you were and if you're ready for another round.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I think most people couldn't get through it anyway.
Yeah, right.
Totally
sober or
sober.
not.
You know, they got to about the middle and
right.
You know, the same thing with the Pledge of Allegiance. You know, ask some chest-pounding patriot to recite the Pledge of Allegiance and see how well they do.
Yeah, probably not very well.
Most of them don't, or to tell you the words of the Star Spangled Banner and see how well they do.
Right.
And so, but the point is that when we became agricultural, we settled down, and now we had things to protect.
Right.
You know, and people who wanted to take that. And here's a great thing. Man as it exists today, Cro-Magnon man, is about 35,000 to 40,000 years old. But we've been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And when you see something like the Ten Commandments, that's an early agricultural age set of rules by which we can survive and get along with each other and deal with agriculture, trade, art, commerce, whatever. You know, don't take this guy's thing. Because before that, if we were 5 guys and ran up against 2 guys who had killed a deer, we would take that deer from them without absolutely any thought or any consequence.
I'm not sure if that's entirely true.
That is entirely true.
The
There
Ten
were no
Commandments. Well, what about Hammurabi's Code?
That's agricultural age. But I'm
But that
talking
was-
about
But
pre-agriculture.
that was way before the Ten Commandments, is what I'm saying.
It doesn't matter.
10,000 years before.
Yeah,
Christ.
Hammurabi's, the Code of Hammurabi,
Yeah.
you know, which was first codified laws, you know, fine. Yeah, it described, that's precisely my point. You need rules
Sure.
to live in an agricultural society because there's trade, there's commerce, there's travel, there's safety, there's accounting, there's contracts,
Yes.
you know, that have to be met and honored.
And there's a government that against predators.
Because you have to, because now you're stable.
Yeah. Otherwise, if I'm bigger and tougher than you, I would just go take your rabbit. I don't have to hunt. I'll just go beat you up and take your food.
Correct. But
Right.
that's how it was in and I emphasize, pre-agricultural age. You know, there were no rules. There were no rules. Hammurabi's Code, the Ten Commandments, all those are agricultural age rules by which we can get along and survive. Now, wait a minute. Here's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
regardless of the rules that we have. We are just beasts with rules now.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes for somebody to trample someone to death nowadays in America is a toaster at 30% off on Black Friday.
There you go. No. What I'm trying to say is we are whales. I forgot how.
Well, that's why we need rules. That's why we have police, because otherwise
I agree with you.
Sure.
Because we're a predatory species.
Yep. We kill each other over a TV on sale.
Well, I just saw a video last night where a guy was shooting other guy over an electric saw.
Wonderful.
And you're willing to kill somebody over an electric saw.
Right.
And here's the point. It took whales about 1.5 million years to develop the blowholes they have in their back so they could dive deeper and eat more plankton. All right. We have made tremendous advances in the last 15,000 years. So our biology, our mindset, our primitiveness has not developed as fast as our society.
Right.
We now have social rules. We have roads. We have showers. We can go to the store and buy food.
We have podcasts.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And birth control.
Thank God.
Well, let me put something to you from one of your Facebook posts that's actually perfect to what you were just talking about. You posted, you could never convince a monkey to give you his banana by promising him limitless bananas after death in monkey heaven.
Monkeys are smarter than us. But you can promise, you can get human beings to give you part of their wealth.
Yes. Yeah.
And their hospitality, and even their women, and even their lives, by promising them eternal life afterwards.
Isn't that crazy? Well, we talked at the beginning of the episode about humans fearing death.
Correct.
And I think that's what it's not necessarily, I think, death that we fear. I think it's the unknown, the edge of the earth, right? Like, how many years did it take for somebody to finally venture out and find out that you don't fall off the edge of the sea when you surf that far?
Well, that was relatively well known, in spite of these.
But it's the unknown. It's the unknown. It took so many years for someone to finally leave the cave and go see what the hell's outside. And even to this day, we're afraid of change. I mean, the whole thing with parents and seeing their kids on cell phones and that whole dynamic is they're seeing change that makes them uncomfortable. Like we're just always we want to keep things as they are. And it takes a crazy guy to come up with a light bulb and say, hey, I'm going to walk into a room, I'm going to flip a switch, and we're going to have light. And everybody's like, what are you, crazy? Light a candle.
It's a great book called A World Lit Only by Fire by an author named William Manchester. And he talks about how life in the Middle Ages was, and even during the Renaissance, when you could only travel as fast as you could walk, or as fast as a horse could walk, because you couldn't run a horse for a very long time. And it's a fascinating story, especially when you realize how fast we've come. I can get in a car and be in Midland in 5 hours.
Oh, sure.
I remember reading a book before I came to El Paso, and the book's name was El Paso, by the way, and it was written by a guy named Baylor, who at some point was the sheriff of El Paso, and he traveled from San Antonio to El Paso. And it took him 3 weeks on horseback. And as we go out on the roads, we saw those little mounds, on the side in the desert. And one of the things he said is he always traveled with his Winchester rifle across his saddle because you couldn't see what was behind those mounds.
Mm-hmm.
And you could be attacked by thieves, Indians back then, or whatever, and you had to have your rifle right there.
Right.
You didn't keep it in the scabbard.
Right.
You had it across. You were walking your horse calmly, and you had your rifle, holding your rifle in the other hand so you could bring it up. It was just an amazing world. We used to take 3 weeks to get from San Antonio to El Paso.
Now you do it in an hour by plane.
And look how much mankind has changed. But yet,
We still kill each other over a TV.
But correct. But our natural tendencies, our natural animalistic tendencies have not changed.
Right.
They can be modified by religion, by morality, by minding the rules, by education, by general agreement that we all can flourish better, by minding the rules. I can drive at 100 miles an hour down your side street if I want, but I choose to drive at the speed limit because I realize that I'm a member of society, and as a member of society, it benefits me and other people around me, to mind the rules. And that's why you have rule breaking, which is often against the law.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me put something else to you. Another one of your posts that I liked. Humans live in a dual reality. The objective reality of rivers, trees, and lions, and on the other hand, the imagined reality of gods, nation states, and corporations. There's a lot to unpack in there.
Yeah.
Dual reality of rivers, trees, and lions, and then the other reality of gods, nation states, and corporations.
What's a nation state?
We
call America a country, a political amalgamation of 51 states, right? But guess what? We're not really that. That's because we all agree on that. It's something, it's a reality. It doesn't exist. When you look south and you see a river dividing Mexico from the US, that's just a river. Mm-hmm. We all agree in our minds that we're going to call it the United States of America from there to the Canadian border. That reality didn't exist 300 years ago. That was just open land. And from sea to shining sea.
Well, you set your borders, but they were much smaller.
No. It doesn't matter what borders you call. Borders are that invented reality that we all agree on.
Is it? I mean,
no. Listen.
But what are you getting at by saying it's?
What I'm saying is that we have to realize that we invent, and it helps us get along, because we all agree on the invented reality that we are Americans and that our border on the south abuts Mexico and our border on the north abuts Canada, and from sea to shining sea, as the song goes.
Right.
We all agree on that, and so we can get along with it. A Mexican Catholic from El Paso can go to China, not speak the language, not ever meet anybody in China, and go to a Catholic church in China, and he will be welcome because they share the same reality, the reality of the Catholic teachings.
Yeah.
And he can go there and he can participate in that.
Right.
Stop and think about that. I mean, what is a corporation? A corporation is an invention. It's something we agree on our money. What is the reality of money? I hand you a green bill and you hand me something else. We both agree on the reality that piece of paper has some sort of intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. Those are the realities. That's a lot different than the reality of a rainstorm, the reality of a lion charging you on the plane,
Right.
Or the reality.
You're saying.
Do you
Invented
understand?
realities versus natural realities.
Correct. Well, concrete reality versus abstract realities. Wow. So we both live in those worlds. And part of knowing what you are about is understanding the abstract realities by which you operate.
Right.
What's wrong with cocaine? Absolutely nothing. People, there's been societies that say cocaine, do all the cocaine you want. Right. Be whoever you want. All of a sudden, we invent the reality that it's bad. You just said how, civilization arose by the desire to create beer.
Right.
In the Fertile Crescent, right? And so all of a sudden we have the reality that beer is evil, and we all agree on that reality, and Congress outlaws alcohol, and we have several years of prohibition.
Yeah.
So those are the agreed upon realities that have nothing to do with concrete objects, with the concrete matters in our lives. You have the reality of a certain ethnic background. You know, you're Middle Eastern, right?
Yep.
You're Lebanese.
Right.
You bring that reality to your everyday life, and you share that reality with members of your family. You can't share that reality with me,
Right.
because I'm not part of it. So you have to dance your reality around me. And likewise, I just met your mom, who, is a wonderful Lebanese woman, but there's no way that she and I have the same view of the world.
Right.
So it's a fascinating, when you stop and think about the realities that we all agree upon. And here's the important thing about it. Can that reality be changed? And how does that affect our politics? Can you have the reality that even though science says this, politics says that? The vaccination issue is a perfect example of it. My political reality is that you don't get vaccinated, and your political reality is that you do get vaccinated. And where does that come from? Where does that divergence come from? Why don't we have a country that believes in science and that everybody should be vaccinated? By the way, I'm fully vaccinated. But there are people who, for political ideology, will not get vaccinated.
Right.
And you go, where does that reality come from? Who creates that reality? And I'll tell you an interesting thing. The fascinating thing to me about Trump is not his political stance, but that he's changing the agreed upon political reality of the United States. And the agreed upon political reality of the United States has been, ever since the founding of this country, you lose an election, you step aside. He has not done so. He continues to challenge the reality that somebody else won the election. And that's a very dangerous thing for democracy.
Yeah.
It's an extremely dangerous thing. So how do you deal with people's reality? What makes that do that? What kind of fear, what kind of view of the world does that? It's a fascinating question that we all have to deal with at this time in our, combined social history.
Right.
And that's what I mean by that. My great-grandmother's reality of what happens to you after death is absolutely different from mine. I'm willing to say I don't know. Probably nothing.
Yeah, I'm good with I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that. Most people aren't. That's why religion is so popular.
One other thing I always talk to my, every time I get a new client, I go, how much time am I going to get? And I always say, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I'm like a doctor. I know the patient's sick, but I haven't seen the x-rays. I haven't seen the urinalysis. I haven't seen the blood exam. I haven't seen the others. I haven't seen the discovery. I don't know how bad they got you. I don't know how they got you. I go, well, and I see the anxiety and the stress that people go through when they don't know what's going to happen to them and their family.
Yeah.
We just had a lady in Mexico call me. Her son got busted in Las Cruces. How much time is he going to do? I don't know. Well, why don't you know? You're the lawyer.
Yeah.
But they can't live. I said, ma'am, I realize it's stressful for you not to know. I said, but here, in my opinion, it's the worst that can happen. Oh, that's too much. I'm telling you, that's the worst that can happen. But I don't want to give you false hope. I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to depress you.
Well, you also don't want to deal with you told me it was going to be this, and then it turned out to be that.
Not only that, that doesn't bother me that much, because I can always look at a client right in the face and go, too fucking bad.
That's probably not going to get you a lot of peace of mind, though.
No. But that's right. But I tell people I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great
you
answer.
Don't know, and I'm not going to lie to you about it.
It drives my manager crazy, by the way. In my sales job, Every time I have a meeting, my manager says, "How'd the meeting go?" So, I don't know. Do you think we're going to get business? I don't know. And she's like, "What do you mean you don't know? You met with them." I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't know." Like, let's just wait and see what's going to happen. And the reason I say that, regardless of how I felt the meeting went, or if I made buddies with the doctor or whatever happened, is because I don't want to set myself up with false expectations that this is going to be some new awesome business relationship. And then it turns out not to be, for whatever reason.
And
I'm okay with I don't know and we'll see. That's actually, I post about that all the time on my social media, and I talk about it often.
And that's most of life.
I don't know and we'll see. I feel like life is so much better when you approach it from the angle of I don't know, we'll see. It just makes things, you eliminate expectations, you eliminate disappointment.
Especially in marriage.
Well,
how's your marriage going to work out? I don't know. We'll see.
That'd be a very wise thing to say.
How are your kids going to come to be raised? I don't know. I'm trying. We'll see.
Right.
It's
expectations are a bitch. They set you up for disappointment.
But most people can't live without knowing.
Absolutely.
And
again, that's why I always say that's why religion is so popular, because it gives you all the answers. So you say, why did my loved one die? Oh, because God wanted them to return to heaven. Well, what happens after I die? Oh, you'll be joined with your loved ones in heaven. Well, what happened? Why are we going through a drought and all our crops are dying? Because you probably did something bad, didn't you? And God is punishing you. So make sure you go confess. It just gives you the answers for everything.
Between philosophy and religion. Religion always starts with the answer, and that answer is always God.
Yeah, it's the answer to everything.
It's the answer to everything.
Until we figure things out.
God's will.
Yeah, until we figure
things
out. It's
God's will. No, right. Philosophy starts with a question and works its way to the answer.
Yes.
Okay? So if you ask a religious person, why do the seas go up? Why do the tides go up and down? 300 years ago, they might have said, well, it's the will of God.
Right. Poseidon.
Or 2,000 years ago, they would have said Poseidon.
Right.
Poseidon's picking his nose, and the tide's going up.
Yeah. Poseidon's having an orgy.
Yeah. Or Poseidon's angry. Or why is it thundering? Why is lightning?
Right.
Zeus is throwing bolts.
Yeah. Right.
Right. But a philosopher would say, why is it thundering? Well, I first saw the clouds come together. Maybe the clouds are smashing into each other. Maybe that caused some kind of friction.
Correct.
And, the same kind of friction I feel when I walk on a dry mat and I see that little electric shock. Maybe that's what's happening up there. So now you're working on the answer through what do they call that? The Socratic method, if you will.
Okay.
All right. You're asking questions, you're developing theories, you're doing this. And that's the basis of real knowledge. And philosophy starts with a question and works its way toward the answer.
Right, as it should.
Whereas religion starts with God and works itself down to the reason.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous thing to do, because then you begin to twist fact to suit theory as opposed to twist theory to suit fact.
It is and it isn't.
Well, it's dangerous because then you never end up evolving, and you keep thinking that like you're
but that's okay.
That person who's convulsing has been invaded by the devil, instead of you realize, oh shit, they're having an epileptic seizure. Let's get them some medication. Let's figure out how to treat that.
But that's okay.
I don't think that's okay.
No, it is okay, because I'll tell you, religion gives hope and meaning to the life of so many.
And that's great, but we shouldn't use it as a way to answer everything in our lives and set up our societies just based on that, on the information in the text alone, and never question anything, and never say, oh, well, God, thy will be done. And so we're not going to figure out how to come up with a medication for a diabetic, because, if God wants to fix their pancreas, he will.
I agree with you. And you can always go back and forth on that. But, religion is a salve on many an open wound.
Oh, of course. The spirituality part of it is great. And I think very therapeutic for a lot of people and very helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fine.
And it's I have, I deal with a lot of drug addicts and a lot of people who are into alcoholism. And
Just about everyone I know is a drug addict.
Yeah.
They're just
unfortunately.
they're the kind of drug addicts that are sort of obscure, that you don't really, they're the kind of drug addict that has 2-3 glasses of wine every night. That's a drug addict.
You think so?
Yeah.
I have a glass of champagne every morning. Does that make me a drug addict?
Probably to some degree.
Well, I'm glad.
Can you live without it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, then maybe not.
Yeah. But not more than a couple of days.
How many people you hear this term? Actually, they use it sort of in a cute kind of way, like especially you see it a lot on like young girls' social media. Coffee addict.
Yeah.
They use that as like a cute thing, like, oh, I'm a coffee addict, let's go get a coffee. But that's really what it is. You are addicted to that caffeine, and it's a stimulant, therefore it's a drug, therefore you're a drug addict.
I would call drug addiction something, whatever addiction, to the point where it begins to be detrimental to your well-being. So, if drinking coffee twice a day doesn't hurt you, then, there's no damage to you or to the society around you.
Sure.
But if you're a meth addict, at a certain point, you're going to be selling meth,
right,
and spreading general misery to supply your own habit.
Yep. Okay, I see what you're saying. That's. I mean, you could draw that distinction.
There's a distinction.
That's a distinction.
There's a distinction.
Fine drawing.
And bringing back that to religion, oftentimes I've seen people, and I'm saying this as an atheist, who find sufficient strength in religion to beat addiction. And that to me is a wonderful thing.
Sure.
That to me is a wonderful thing. I don't care what hook you have to use. If you can straighten out your life, if you can quit using drugs.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And avoiding your teeth from falling out and getting meth mouth and doing crazy stuff to,
sure,
or adding to the general misery by dealing to supply your own habit. I think all that, and if you use religion for that purpose,
wonderful,
it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, wonderful.
And even if you don't have that, if you're just a normal human being, if you're just somebody who believes, somebody who gets comfort from that, somebody who appreciates and takes the teachings, and I've seen this in some judges, George Bush appointed a whole bunch of religious judges, and I see the kindness side of religion being applied to the sentencing they apply. There's eventually judges who, at first I criticized the concept. I always used to say they were appointed for their knowledge of the Bible rather than for the knowledge of the Constitution. But over the years, I've seen a lot of these judges mellow out and become kind and put their religious teachings into their practice, and understand human foible, human condition. So I think that religiousness can instill a sense of kindness if you're a real follower.
It could, yep.
A sense of kindness, a sense of understanding.
It could
a sense of finding, let's say for Christianity, a sense of finding the gentle side of Christ and applying that to your daily life and enhancing not only your life, but the life of those around you. So in that sense, religion is a wonderful thing.
Anyway, I know you have to leave soon. So I want to finish with, you told me a story one time about a friend of yours who was married and he went to the pool with his girlfriend and he got caught or something like that.
Do you want to hear it again?
I want to hear that story. Yes. We'll wrap up on that. I know you got to leave in like 5 minutes.
Yeah. This buddy of mine's an attorney. Right. So, from Chicago. So he was married and he was messing around with his wife. So he told his wife he had a case in Miami. So he packed his bags and went to Miami. And he went to, what was that hotel? the Fontainebleau in Miami. And he also paid for his girlfriend to meet him in Miami. And they didn't even go on the same plane. She went there, or he went there first. I forgot who got there first. And at some point, they go out to the pool at the Fontainebleau, and they sit in lounge chairs.
Just sorry, try to pull this a little bit closer to you.
And they sit in lounge chairs, and they are holding hands in the lounge chair. They're getting drinks. And he looks up, and he sees his sister-in-law.
What are the odds?
Yeah. Oh, no, he had told his wife he was going to New York.
Oh, okay.
He told his wife he was going to New York. He goes to Miami with his girlfriend. This when cell phones were first just invented. And he tells his wife he's going to New York on a case, and looks up, and he sees his sister-in-law, and she's staring right at him. He whispers to his girlfriend, says, "I got to go, baby. You're welcome to stay here. We have a reservation for 4 days. I need to go." That's my sister-in-law staring at me. Girlfriend says, "Okay." Goes back up to his room, right? Grabs his suitcase, packs his stuff, takes to the airport, gets an airplane to New York, checks into, I think it was the Hyatt. And once in New York, he calls his wife. And his wife goes off on him. "You son of a bitch." My sister says, "Baby, I'm in New York. Call me back." He hangs up, gives her the phone number to the hotel, the whole shebang. She calls him back, says, "Oh my God, you have a twin." Says, "Yeah, my sister-in-law swears she saw you." All right. He was in New York within 5 hours after the sister first saw him. So he goofed around in New York a day or two and then went back home.
That's hilarious.
Hmm?
She did put together that he could have traveled from Miami to New York.
It didn't occur to her.
time.
It didn't occur to her. Apparently, it didn't occur to her.
I guess she would have felt like she'd be accusing him of a lot if she said that.
Yeah, well, and
that's hilarious. What a lawyer thing to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a smart man. Any smart man.
I guess so. That. Yeah, I don't know if I would have thought of that.
Yeah, well, why not?
I don't know. Well, I think it would have been easier to. This is my own view on marriage. It would have been easier to not be out there with the girlfriend to begin with. But it's a hilarious story nonetheless.
Well, people come to all sorts of accommodations in life.
I believe it.
And you'd be surprised. I had an uncle.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's just, to each their own.
Yeah, I had an uncle who was actually a professor of sociology at the University of the Americas. But University of the Americas, that's where I went. University of Chicago, where Kinsey started doing his first sexual habit survey, the American population in the late 40s, early 50s. And he said at that time, he was a young student, and he was actually one of the guys doing surveys. He said, after a week on the job, talking to maybe 5 couples per day, he said, I knew that people have all sorts of accommodations.
Oh, I believe it. For sure. For sure. And actually, the more I get to know some of my friends intimately, the more I realize just what you're saying is true. Yeah. It's that's something that, like, in the last, I don't know, few months, probably, I've just found out about some of my friends. Their lives aren't what I thought they were.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people that call me up. A guy that's been married about 25 years told me he caught his wife in a hotel with another guy. He wanted to know this and that. I go, so what? I said, you own a big home, you got a couple of kids, you're going to give her half of everything just because she's sleeping with somebody else? He says, what should I do? I said, get a girlfriend.
That's probably awesome lawyer advice right there.
I said, get a girlfriend.
That's what his accountant would tell him.
Yeah, I said, get a girlfriend. He said, how should I handle it? I go, talk to your wife. You know, is she into the guy? Talk to the guy. Do you want to keep her? You get to keep her, but leave my shit here. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised
Yeah.
how many.
That's very rational.
Correct.
Very rational.
You know, and it's, I told him, I go, I said, how's your sex life with your wife? And he goes, that's pretty slow. I said, well, have you looked somewhere? He goes, no, I've been thinking about it.
Well, there you go.
I said, well, you know, that's because your wife is into another person.
Right.
She's into another person. You guys have been married 25 years. She's into somebody else now.
Right.
You know, so how old are your kids? You're going to break up their home? You're going to do this? You're going to do that?
Right.
I said, talk to your wife. Does she want to leave with a guy? You know? Or come to an accommodation.
Mm-hmm. And I know people who have done just that. Anyways, we got to wrap up.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here. As always, it's great to see you.
I wish you luck in your new venture.
Thank you.
We're going to miss you in El Paso. You're
Thank
a great
you.
credit to El Paso and to everybody that knows you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Know,
Thank
and
you.
Good luck to you, man.
Thank you.
You know, we can still talk and maybe we can learn how to do this from far away.
Absolutely. Oh, I could do virtuals. I figured it out recently. I interviewed a well-known professional poker player who lives in Vegas, Andrew Nami. That was 2 episodes ago. We did a virtual with him. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that was cool. So,
all right. Brother.
Ken Del Valle, ladies and gentlemen.
Famous attorney at law.
Yeah. Bell rang twice.
That was good. That was a lot better than the first one. It was a lot mellower.
Yeah, it was more mellow.